Lisa had lived on her little farm for over 20 years. Her 5 acres sat right in the middle of what used to be quiet farmland, but now fancy houses surrounded her on every side. The developers had tried to buy her out dozens of times, offering more money each year. But Lisa wasn't interested. This was her home, her sanctuary, and most importantly, it was where Thunder lived. Thunder was her prize bull, a massive black Angus who weighed nearly 2,000 pounds. Despite his intimidating size, he was the gentlest giant you could ever meet. Kids from the old neighborhood used to come by just to feed him grass through the fence. Thunder would carefully take the grass with his huge tongue, never once being rough or scary. Lisa had raised him from a calf, and he trusted her completely. When Willowbrook Estates started going up around her property, Lisa knew things would change. The first few families who moved in were actually pretty nice. They liked having a real farm next door. Their kids were fascinated by Thunder, and Lisa enjoyed talking to them about farm life. Some neighbors even asked if they could buy fresh eggs from her chickens or tomatoes from her garden. But then the Hendersons moved into the biggest house on Maple Street. Robert Henderson was a successful businessman who wore expensive suits and drove a brand new Mercedes. His wife Amy seemed nice enough, but Robert made it clear from day one that he had big plans for their new neighborhood. Within 3 months of moving in, Robert had somehow gotten himself elected as president of the Homeowners Association. Lisa wasn't part of the HOA since her property was grandfathered in under old zoning laws, but she started hearing rumors that made her nervous. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. Lisa was feeding Thunder his breakfast when she saw Robert standing at her fence, taking pictures with his phone. He was dressed in his usual polo shirt and pressed khakis, holding a fancy clipboard. "Good morning," Lisa called out, walking over to see what he wanted. Robert barely looked at her. "I'm documenting the current state of this property," he said in a cold voice. "The HOA has received several complaints about the smell and appearance of this farm." Lisa was confused. "Complaints from who? I've never had anyone complain before." "That's not really the point," Robert replied, still taking pictures. "This neighborhood has standards now. Property values are important. We can't have livestock affecting everyone else's investment." Thunder wandered over to see what was happening. The big bull was curious about the new person, but kept his distance, just watching with his calm brown eyes. Robert immediately stepped back from the fence. "That animal needs to be properly contained. What if it gets loose and hurts someone?" Lisa almost laughed. "Thunder has never hurt anyone in his entire life. He's actually afraid of butterflies." But Robert wasn't interested in hearing about Thunder's gentle nature. He finished taking his pictures and walked away without another word. Over the next few weeks, Lisa started getting official letters in the mail. They came on fancy HOA letterhead and were signed by Robert Henderson, president. The first letter complained about the odor emanating from livestock and demanded that Lisa take immediate corrective action. The second letter claimed her fence was not in compliance with neighborhood aesthetic standards. The third letter suggested that keeping livestock in a residential area was potentially hazardous to community safety. Lisa took all the letters to her lawyer, Mr. Wilson, who had helped her family for years. He read through everything carefully and shook his head. "You're absolutely fine, Lisa," he assured her. "Your property rights are rock solid. You were here first and you're grandfathered in under agricultural exemptions. This HOA president can't do anything to force you out." But knowing she was legally protected didn't make the harassment any easier to deal with. Robert seemed to make it his personal mission to find problems with her property. He would drive by several times a day, sometimes stopping to measure distances between her fence and the road. He complained to the county about her mailbox being improperly positioned. He even called animal control once, claiming Thunder looked malnourished, which was ridiculous since the bull was clearly healthy and well-fed. The other neighbors started to feel uncomfortable with Robert's obsession. Mrs. Peterson, who lived next door to Lisa, mentioned that Robert had tried to get her to sign a petition demanding Lisa's removal. When Mrs. Peterson refused, Robert got angry and accused her of not caring about property values. Lisa tried to stay positive and ignore Robert's behavior, but it was getting harder every day. She had always loved the peaceful mornings on her farm, but now she found herself constantly watching for Robert's car, wondering what new complaint he would come up with. Thunder seemed to sense the tension too. The big bull would watch Robert whenever he showed up, his ears alert and his body language more protective than usual. Thunder had always been protective of Lisa, but now he seemed to understand that this particular person meant trouble. The situation got worse when Robert discovered that Lisa's fence line extended exactly 2 3/4 inches onto what he claimed was HOA common property. He had hired a professional surveyor and everything. Lisa's lawyer checked the old property deeds and confirmed that her fence had been in the exact same spot for over 30 years, long before the HOA existed. But Robert didn't care about the legal history. He sent Lisa a certified letter demanding that she move her entire fence within 30 days or face legal action. The letter threatened fines of $100 per day until the violation was corrected. By this point, other neighbors were starting to speak up. Tom and Janet Miller, who lived across the street, told Lisa they were sorry about Robert's behavior. "He's making everyone miserable," Janet said. "Last week he tried to fine us because our grass was a 1/4 inch too tall." Even some of the newer residents were getting tired of Robert's power trips. The Johnsons had been forced to repaint their entire house because Robert decided their shutters were the wrong shade of blue. The Garcias received a violation notice because their teenage son's car was too old and unsightly to park in their own driveway. Lisa realized she wasn't the only target, but she was definitely Robert's main focus. He seemed to take her very existence as a personal insult. Every morning when he left for work, he would slow down as he passed her property, staring at Thunder with obvious disgust. Thunder, meanwhile, continued being his usual gentle self. He would graze peacefully in his pasture, occasionally looking up to watch the cars go by. Sometimes kids would still stop to say hello, and Thunder would amble over to the fence for attention. Lisa loved watching these interactions because they reminded her why she had fallen in love with farm life in the first place. But she could feel the storm clouds gathering. Robert was getting more aggressive with his complaints, and his letters were becoming more threatening. Lisa knew that eventually something was going to give. She just hoped that when it happened, everyone would remember that she had tried to be reasonable and peaceful throughout this whole mess. Winter turned into spring, and Robert's campaign against Lisa became more intense with each passing week. What started as occasional drive-bys and complaint letters had turned into something that felt like full-time surveillance. Lisa began to feel like she was living under a microscope. Every morning at exactly 7:30, Robert would drive past her property on his way to work. He would slow down to almost a crawl, sometimes stopping completely to take more pictures or make notes. On his ever-present clipboard, Lisa started timing her morning chores to avoid being outside when he passed, but it felt wrong to hide on her own property. The letters kept coming too, sometimes 2 or 3 in a single week. Robert had apparently appointed himself as a one-man inspection team. One letter complained that Lisa's chicken coop was visible from the street and therefore an eyesore. Another demanded that she paint her barn because the weathered wood looked unprofessional. The most ridiculous one claimed that Thunder's water trough was positioned in a way that created unsightly reflections that bothered drivers. Lisa's mailbox became a source of daily anxiety. She never knew what new demands or threats might be waiting for her. Her lawyer, Mr. Wilson, assured her that none of Robert's complaints had any legal merit, but the constant harassment was wearing her down. Things got worse when Robert started involving other people in his crusade. He called the county health department, claiming that Lisa's farm created unsanitary conditions that might contaminate the groundwater. The inspector who came out was actually fascinated by Thunder and spent 20 minutes petting the gentle giant while explaining to Robert's obvious disappointment that everything was in perfect order. Robert then called the fire department, insisting that Lisa's hay storage was a fire hazard. The fire chief, who had known Lisa's family for decades, politely explained that her setup was actually safer than most commercial operations. But Robert wouldn't give up. He filed complaints with animal control, the building department, and even the post office, claiming Lisa's mailbox was improperly installed. Each agency visit meant Lisa had to take time off from her regular work to deal with inspectors and officials. While most of them were understanding and even sympathetic, the constant interruptions were exhausting. Lisa started keeping a detailed log of every complaint, every visit, and every interaction with Robert, just in case she needed evidence later. Though, other neighbors were getting tired of Robert's behavior too. Mrs. Peterson mentioned that Robert had started a petition to remove agricultural operations from residential areas. When only 3 people signed it out of over 50 households, Robert got furious and accused everyone of not caring about their property values. Tom Miller told Lisa that Robert had cornered him at the mailbox, demanding to know why he wouldn't support the petition. "I told him Thunder's the best neighbor we've got," Tom said with a laugh. "At least he doesn't throw loud parties or blast music all night." But Robert's obsession was affecting more than just Lisa. The entire neighborhood was feeling the pressure of his increasingly strict enforcement of HOA rules. The Garcias received a fine because their teenage daughter left her bicycle on the front lawn overnight. The Johnsons got a violation notice for having a small garden gnome in their flower bed, which Robert claimed violated the lawn ornament restrictions. People started avoiding Robert whenever possible. When he showed up at neighborhood gatherings, conversations would die down and people would make excuses to leave early. Even his own wife Amy seemed embarrassed by his behavior, often apologizing to neighbors when Robert wasn't around. Lisa tried to stay focused on the positive aspects of her life. Thunder was thriving, her garden was producing beautiful vegetables, and her chickens were laying plenty of eggs. She still enjoyed sharing fresh produce with friendly neighbors, and their genuine appreciation reminded her why she loved farm life so much. But Robert's presence was becoming impossible to ignore. He had started walking the perimeter of her property, measuring distances and taking photographs from every possible angle. Lisa caught him one morning standing on a ladder in his own backyard, apparently trying to get better photos of her barn from above. The situation reached a new level of absurdity when Robert hired a professional appraiser to assess how much Lisa's farm was allegedly reducing nearby property values. The appraiser spent about 10 minutes looking around before telling Robert that the farm was actually a positive feature that many buyers would find attractive. Robert refused to accept this conclusion and hired a second appraiser, then a third. When all 3 reached similar conclusions, Robert accused them of being biased in favor of agricultural interests. Lisa found out about this from Mrs. Peterson, who had overheard Robert arguing with the last appraiser on his front lawn. The breaking point came when Robert discovered the fence issue. He had hired a surveyor to map the exact property lines, hoping to find some violation he could use against Lisa. When the survey showed that her fence extended 2 3/4 inches onto what he claimed was HOA common land, Robert acted like he had found buried treasure. Lisa's lawyer explained that the fence had been in place for over 30 years, long before the HOA existed, and that adverse possession laws would protect her even if there was a boundary dispute. But Robert didn't care about legal precedents or common sense. He saw an opportunity to force Lisa into court, and he jumped on it with both feet. The certified letter demanding fence relocation arrived on a Friday afternoon. Lisa read it twice, hardly believing what she was seeing. Robert wanted her to move her entire fence, which would mean rebuilding Thunder's entire pasture area. The cost would be enormous, and the disruption to Thunder's routine would be stressful for the gentle bull. But the letter also contained a new threat. Robert claimed that if Lisa didn't comply within 30 days, the HOA would seek an injunction to have Thunder removed from the property as a public nuisance. Lisa's hands shook as she read those words. Thunder wasn't just her livestock, he was her companion, her friend, practically a member of her family. That weekend, several neighbors stopped by to express their support. The Millers brought a casserole and offered to help with legal expenses if needed. Mrs. Peterson, who was nearly 80 years old, said she was ready to chain herself to Lisa's fence if anyone tried to move it. Even some of the newer residents came by to apologize for Robert's behavior and assure Lisa that she had their support. But support from neighbors couldn't change the legal reality that Robert was putting Lisa through expensive and stressful court proceedings. Every day brought new certified letters, new demands, new threats. Lisa found herself checking the mailbox with dread, wondering what impossible requirement Robert would come up with next. Thunder seemed to sense the tension around him. The big bull would watch Robert's car more intently when it passed, his ears forward and his body alert. Lisa noticed that Thunder had started positioning himself closer to the fence line, as if he was keeping guard. The gentle giant had never shown aggressive behavior toward anyone, but there was definitely something different in the way he watched Robert. Lisa tried to maintain her normal routine, but the constant stress was taking its toll. She had trouble sleeping, and her appetite suffered. Some mornings she would stand at her kitchen window watching Thunder graze peacefully in his pasture and wonder how much longer she could keep fighting. The morning of the confrontation started like any other Saturday. Lisa woke up early, made her coffee, and headed outside to check on Thunder and the other animals. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that made the grass sway in Thunder's pasture. It should have been a peaceful day. Lisa noticed that one section of her fence near the road had a loose board. It wasn't damaged badly, just needed a few new nails to secure it properly. She grabbed her toolbox from the barn and walked over to make the repair. Thunder was grazing about 50 feet away, completely relaxed and enjoying the morning sunshine. Same way. Lisa worked on the fence. She heard the rumble of a large truck engine. She looked up to see Robert's oversized red pickup truck approaching. This wasn't his usual sedan. This was his weekend vehicle, a massive truck that seemed way too big for someone who lived in suburbia and worked in an office. The truck had every possible accessory: chrome bumpers, oversized tires, light bars, and a horn that could probably be heard from 3 blocks away. Robert pulled up right beside her property line and parked with his engine still running. Lisa continued working on her fence, hoping he would just drive away like usual. But instead, she heard the truck door slam shut with more force than necessary. "Well, well, well," Robert's voice carried across the morning air. "Still ignoring the fence violation, I see." Lisa looked up from her work. Robert was standing beside his truck dressed in his weekend uniform of polo shirt and khakis, with that familiar clipboard in his hand. But something was different about his demeanor today. He seemed more agitated than usual, almost like he was looking for a fight. "I'm just fixing a loose board," Lisa replied calmly, turning back to her work. "Nothing to do with property lines." "Everything you do affects this neighborhood," Robert shot back, his voice getting louder. "That fence is still illegally positioned, and I've got the survey to prove it. 2 3/4 inches onto HOA property." Lisa sighed and set down her hammer. "Robert, my lawyer already explained this to your lawyer. That fence has been in the same spot for over 30 years. It's not moving." Robert's face started turning red. "Your lawyer can say whatever he wants, but I know my rights as HOA president. This neighborhood has standards, and you're violating every single one of them." Thunder lifted his head from the grass, attracted by the raised voices. The big bull looked toward the fence where Lisa and Robert were having their discussion. His ears were alert, but he seemed more curious than concerned. "Look at that thing," Robert continued, pointing at Thunder. 2,000 pounds of liability walking around like it owns the place. What happens when it breaks through that flimsy fence and tramples someone's kid? Lisa felt her patience starting to wear thin. Thunder has never hurt anyone in his entire life. He's gentler than most dogs. "I don't care how gentle you think it is," Robert replied, his voice getting shriller. "It's a dangerous animal, and it doesn't belong in a residential area. Period." Thunder started walking slowly toward the fence, probably wondering what all the commotion was about. His massive frame moved with surprising grace, and his expression was calm and curious. Robert took a step backward when he saw Thunder approaching. "See? It's coming over here right now, probably getting ready to attack." Lisa almost laughed despite her frustration. "He's coming over because he's curious about why you're yelling. Thunder's probably wondering if you're okay." "I am not yelling," Robert yelled, completely contradicting himself. "I am simply trying to maintain community standards in a neighborhood that cost me $500,000 to move into." By now, Thunder had reached the fence and was standing about 10 feet away from where Robert was having his meltdown. The bull's big brown eyes looked back and forth between Lisa and Robert, as if he was trying to understand what the problem was. "That animal is staring at me," Robert said, his voice getting more agitated. "It's plotting something. I can see it in its eyes." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Bulls don't plot, Robert. He's just curious about what's going on." "Don't tell me what animals do or don't do," Robert snapped. "I've done my research. Bulls are aggressive, territorial, dangerous creatures. That thing is a lawsuit waiting to happen." Thunder tilted his head slightly, still watching the strange man who was making so much noise. If anything, the bull looked confused by Robert's behavior. Robert started pacing back and forth beside his truck, waving his clipboard around as he talked. "I've tried to be reasonable about this situation. I've followed proper procedures. I've filed appropriate complaints through official channels, but you refuse to cooperate." "I've cooperated with every legitimate inspection," Lisa replied, "and every single one has concluded that my property is in full compliance with all applicable regulations." "Those inspectors don't understand property values," Robert shot back. "They don't live here. They don't have to wake up every morning and smell livestock manure. They don't have to explain to their friends why their neighborhood looks like some kind of petting zoo." Thunder took a few steps closer to the fence, apparently fascinated by Robert's animated gesturing and loud voice. The bull had probably never seen a human act so strangely. "Now it's getting closer," Robert said, his voice rising to nearly a shout. "Do you see what I mean? This is exactly the kind of dangerous behavior I've been warning everyone about." Lisa looked at Thunder, who was standing calmly by the fence, his tail swishing peacefully as he watched Robert's performance. "He's not being dangerous, he's being curious. There's a difference." "I know dangerous when I see it," Robert declared, marching back toward his truck. "And I'm not going to stand here and let some overgrown farm animal intimidate me." Lisa watched as Robert opened his truck door and reached inside. She assumed he was getting ready to leave, but instead he pulled out something that made her heart skip a beat. It was an air horn, one of those industrial-strength emergency signals that boat captains use in fog. "What are you doing with that?" Lisa asked, suddenly feeling worried. "I'm making a point," Robert replied, holding the air horn like it was some kind of weapon. "That animal needs to learn some respect. It needs to understand that this neighborhood has rules." Thunder was still standing by the fence, completely unaware that anything was wrong. He was actually closer now, maybe only 6 feet from where Robert was standing. The bull's expression was still curious and calm. "Robert, don't," Lisa said, dropping her tools and starting to move toward him. "You'll scare him." "Good," Robert replied. "Maybe a little scare will teach it to stay away from civilized people." Before Lisa could stop him, Robert raised the air horn and pointed it directly at Thunder. The bull was standing peacefully, probably wondering if the strange human had any treats to offer. Robert pressed the button. The sound was deafening. 3 long, aggressive blasts that echoed off the houses and probably woke up half the neighborhood. The noise was so loud and sudden that even Lisa jumped backward, her hands flying to her ears. Thunder's reaction was immediate and dramatic. The gentle giant who had never shown aggression toward anyone suddenly transformed into something completely different. His peaceful expression vanished, replaced by surprise and anger. His massive head jerked up, his eyes went wide, and his entire body tensed like a coiled spring. "There," Robert said, apparently pleased with himself. "Maybe now it will learn to keep its distance from decent people." But Thunder wasn't backing away. Instead, the bull was focused entirely on Robert, his ears pinned back and his nostrils flaring. For the first time in his life, Thunder looked truly angry. Robert suddenly seemed to realize that his plan might have backfired. The air horn slipped from his hand as he saw 2,000 pounds of very unhappy bull staring directly at him. Thunder pawed the ground once, twice, then let out a bellow that made Robert's air horn sound like a whisper. The moment Thunder's bellow echoed across the neighborhood, everything changed. Lisa had never heard that sound come from her gentle bull before. It was deep, loud, and filled with an anger that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. Robert stood frozen beside his truck, still holding the air horn that had started this whole mess. His face had gone completely white as he stared at the massive bull who was now focused entirely on him. Thunder's peaceful brown eyes had turned dark with fury, and his entire body language screamed danger. "Oh no," Lisa whispered, realizing what was about to happen. She had raised Thunder from a calf and knew every one of his moods, but she had never seen him like this. The gentle giant was gone, replaced by nearly a ton of pure muscle and righteous anger. Thunder took a step toward the fence, then another. His hooves hit the ground with enough force to make the earth tremble. Every step was deliberate and purposeful, like a freight train building up steam. His massive head was lowered, and Lisa could see the determination in his eyes. "Maybe you should get back in your truck," Lisa called out to Robert, who seemed too shocked to move. Robert finally snapped out of his trance and scrambled toward his truck door, but Thunder had already made his decision. With a snort that sounded like steam escaping from a locomotive, the bull charged. Thunder hit the fence at full speed. The wooden boards that Lisa had been repairing just minutes earlier exploded like toothpicks. The posts that had been anchored 3 feet deep into the ground snapped like twigs. Thunder barely slowed down as he plowed through what had been a perfectly good fence. Robert managed to get 1 foot into his truck before Thunder cleared the fence line and set his sights on the shiny red pickup. The bull's charge was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. His massive hooves threw up chunks of grass and dirt as he gained speed, heading straight for Robert's pride and joy. "No, no, no," Robert screamed, trying to climb into his truck. But the running board was high off the ground and his khaki pants weren't designed for athletic activities. He slipped and fell backward, landing hard on the grass beside his truck. Thunder reached the truck just as Robert hit the ground. The bull lowered his head and rammed into the passenger side with the force of a wrecking ball. The impact was tremendous. The entire truck lifted off its right side wheels, balanced in the air for what seemed like forever, then crashed back, down with a sound that could probably be heard from 3 blocks away. But Thunder wasn't finished. The bull backed up a few steps, snorted again, and charged the truck a second time. This hit was even harder than the first. The truck's side panels crumpled like aluminum foil. The passenger door buckled completely, and the side mirror went flying across the yard like a missile. Robert was still on the ground, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, trying to get away from his own truck. His expensive polo shirt was grass-stained. His khakis were torn at the knee, and his perfectly styled hair was sticking up in all directions. "Help!" Robert screamed. "Someone call the police! That thing is trying to kill me!" Thunder stepped back and examined his handiwork. The truck's right side was completely destroyed. The shiny red paint was scratched and dented beyond recognition. One of the oversized tires was flat, and the chrome bumper was hanging at an odd angle. But the bull wasn't done expressing his opinion about air horns and rude neighbors. Thunder circled around to the front of the truck and gave it another tremendous headbutt. This time the impact was so powerful that the entire vehicle slid sideways across the grass. The truck's rear end swung around like it was doing some kind of bizarre dance move. Lisa watched in amazement as Thunder continued his assault on Robert's truck. Each hit was perfectly calculated and devastatingly effective. The bull seemed to understand exactly how much force was needed to cause maximum damage without actually destroying the truck completely. Robert was still on the ground, but he had managed to crawl far enough away to feel relatively safe. He was breathing heavily and looked like he had just run a marathon. His clipboard was lying forgotten in the grass, its pages scattered by the breeze. "Do something!" Robert yelled at Lisa. "Control your animal!" Lisa looked at Thunder, who was now standing beside the battered truck, breathing heavily but looking satisfied with his work. The bull's anger seemed to be cooling off, replaced by a sense of accomplishment. "Thunder," Lisa called out in a calm voice. "Easy, boy. I think you've made your point." Thunder looked over at Lisa, then back at Robert, who was still sitting on the ground looking shocked and disheveled. The bull snorted once more as if to say, "And stay out," then turned and walked back toward his pasture. But there was one more surprise in store. As Thunder headed back toward the remains of his fence, the truck started making ominous creaking noises. All those impacts had apparently damaged more than just the body panels. The vehicle began tilting slowly to one side, like a sinking ship. Robert scrambled to his feet and ran toward his truck. "No, no, no, not toward the ditch!" But it was too late. The truck's weight distribution had been completely thrown off by Thunder's attacks. The damaged suspension couldn't handle the stress anymore. With a final groan of twisted metal, the entire truck slid sideways down the small embankment beside the road and came to rest at an angle in the drainage ditch. The sight was almost comical. Robert's massive, expensive pickup truck was sitting nose down in 2 feet of muddy water, its rear end sticking up in the air like it was trying to do a headstand. The chrome exhaust pipes were completely submerged, and water was already starting to seep through the damaged door seals. Robert stood at the edge of the ditch, staring at his truck in complete disbelief. His mouth was hanging open and he kept running his hands through his disheveled hair. "My truck," he whispered. "My beautiful truck." Thunder had returned to his pasture and was calmly eating grass as if nothing unusual had happened. The only signs of his recent adventure were the destroyed fence and the truck in the ditch. The bull looked completely peaceful again, just a gentle giant enjoying his morning snack. By now, neighbors were starting to appear. Mrs. Peterson came hurrying over from her house, moving faster than Lisa had seen her move in years. Tom and Janet Miller emerged from their front door, both of them trying not to smile at the sight of Robert's demolished truck. "Is everyone okay?" Mrs. Peterson called out. "We heard all kinds of noise." Lisa looked around at the scene. Robert was standing beside the ditch, covered in grass stains and looking like he had been through a tornado. His truck was half submerged and completely destroyed. Thunder was peacefully grazing as if nothing had happened, and her fence was scattered across the yard in about 1,000 pieces. "Everyone's fine," Lisa replied. "Just a little misunderstanding about air horns and bulls." Robert finally found his voice. "Misunderstanding? That animal destroyed my truck. Look at it. It's completely ruined." Tom Miller walked over to examine the truck in the ditch. "Wow, Robert, how did you manage to get it down there?" "I didn't do anything," Robert protested. "That crazy bull attacked my truck for no reason." Janet Miller looked at the scattered fence pieces, then at Thunder, who was still eating grass peacefully. "What exactly happened here?" Lisa was about to explain when Robert started talking again, his voice getting higher and more frantic with each word. "I was having a reasonable discussion about property violations, and that monster just went berserk. It's a dangerous animal. It should be put down. I'm calling the police, animal control, and my lawyer." Mrs. Peterson looked at Robert's grass-stained clothes and disheveled appearance, then at Thunder, who looked like the most harmless creature on earth. "What were you discussing so reasonably?" she asked with a knowing look in her eyes. Mrs. Peterson's question hung in the air like a challenge. Robert looked around at the growing crowd of neighbors, all of whom were staring at him with various degrees of amusement and disapproval. His expensive polo shirt was torn, his khakis were stained with grass and mud, and his hair looked like he had stuck his finger in an electrical outlet. "I was simply trying to enforce neighborhood standards," Robert said, attempting to regain his dignity. "That bull is a menace to public safety." Tom Miller looked over at Thunder, who was still peacefully grazing about 50 feet away. The bull looked up briefly, noticed all the people watching him, and went back to eating grass with complete indifference. "Looks pretty dangerous to me," Tom said with obvious sarcasm. "I can see why you were so scared." More neighbors were arriving now. The Garcias came jogging over from their morning walk, followed by the Johnsons and their teenage kids. Even some people from the far end of the street had wandered over to see what all the commotion was about. Lisa realized she needed to call the police before Robert did. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, explaining that there had been an incident involving livestock in a vehicle, but that no one was injured. "The police are on their way," she announced to the crowd. Robert's face lit up. "Good. When they get here, I'm pressing charges. Destruction of property, reckless endangerment, keeping dangerous animals. That bull is going to be put down, and she's going to pay for my truck." Mrs. Peterson, who had been quietly listening to Robert's threats, stepped forward. "Robert, dear, before you start making accusations, maybe you should tell everyone exactly what happened." "I already told you what happened," Robert replied, his voice getting defensive. "That animal attacked my truck without provocation." "Without provocation?" Janet Miller asked. "So you were just standing there minding your own business when Thunder decided to charge?" Robert hesitated for just a moment, and Lisa could see him trying to figure out how to spin the story in his favor. I was having a legitimate discussion about property violations. The bull obviously doesn't like being held accountable for its behavior. Tommy Garcia, who was about 16 and had always loved visiting Thunder, spoke up. "Mr. Henderson, what's that thing in the grass over there?" Everyone turned to look where Tommy was pointing. There, lying forgotten in the scattered fence debris, was Robert's air horn. Robert's face went pale. That has nothing to do with... "Is that an air horn?" Mrs. Peterson asked, walking over to pick it up. "Robert, you didn't use this on Thunder, did you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Robert looked around at all the faces staring at him, and Lisa could practically see him calculating whether he could lie his way out of this situation. "I may have used it to signal for help," Robert said weakly. "Signal for help from who?" Tom Miller asked. "We're in the middle of suburbia, not the middle of the ocean." Tommy Garcia shook his head in disbelief. "Dude, you can't blow an air horn at a bull. That's like poking a sleeping bear with a stick." Before Robert could respond, they heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Within minutes, 2 police cars pulled up, followed by an animal control truck. Lisa felt her stomach clench with worry. Even though she knew Thunder hadn't done anything wrong, seeing official vehicles always made her nervous. Officer Martinez, who Lisa recognized from previous calls Robert had made, got out of the first police car. He looked around at the scene, the destroyed fence, the truck in the ditch, the crowd of neighbors, and Thunder grazing peacefully in the background. "Okay, folks, what happened here?" Officer Martinez asked. Robert immediately launched into his version of events. "Officer, I was having a reasonable discussion about property violations when that dangerous bull attacked my truck without warning. I demand that you arrest the owner and have that animal destroyed immediately." Officer Martinez looked over at Thunder, who was still eating grass and paying no attention to the crowd of humans. "That bull attacked your truck?" "Yes. Look at the damage. That animal is clearly vicious and uncontrolled." Officer Martinez walked over to examine the truck in the ditch. The damage was extensive: dented panels, broken mirrors, flat tires, and a completely buckled passenger door. But there was something odd about the way the truck had ended up in the ditch. "Mr. Henderson, how exactly did your truck end up down there?" "The bull pushed it," Robert said. "After it finished destroying the body panels, it pushed the whole truck into the ditch." Officer Martinez looked skeptical. "A bull pushed your truck into the ditch? This truck must weigh at least 6,000 pounds. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward. "Officer, I think you should know that Mr. Henderson was using that air horn on the bull." She held up the device for everyone to see. The animal control officer, a woman named Diana, who had dealt with Robert's complaints before, immediately understood the situation. "You used an air horn on a bull? Mr. Henderson, that's considered animal harassment. It's also incredibly dangerous." "I was defending myself," Robert protested. "From what?" Diana asked. "From all accounts, the bull was just standing there peacefully until you decided to blast an air horn at it." Officer Martinez was taking notes and interviewing witnesses. Every single neighbor told the same story. Robert had been yelling at Lisa. Thunder had wandered over out of curiosity. And then Robert had used the air horn on the bull for no apparent reason. "So let me get this straight," Officer Martinez said to Robert. "You deliberately used an air horn to startle a 2,000-pound bull, and then you're surprised that it got angry?" Robert's face was getting redder by the minute. "That bull should have been properly contained. It shouldn't have been able to reach my truck." "The bull was contained," Diana pointed out. "It only broke through the fence after you provoked it with the air horn. If you hadn't harassed the animal, none of this would have happened." The crowd of neighbors was getting larger, and Lisa could hear people whispering and chuckling as they shared their own stories about Robert's behavior over the past few months. The Garcias mentioned the bicycle fine. The Johnsons talked about being forced to repaint their house. Mrs. Peterson brought up the petition that nobody would sign. Officer Martinez finished taking statements and walked back over to Robert. Mr. Henderson, based on witness testimony, it appears that you provoked this incident by using an air horn on the bull. That constitutes animal harassment, which is a misdemeanor offense. What about my truck? Robert demanded. Who's going? To pay for the damage? Well, Officer Martinez said, looking at his notes, since you caused the incident by harassing the bull, your insurance company is going to have to determine coverage. But I have to warn you, most insurance policies don't cover damage that results from the policyholder's own illegal or reckless behavior. Robert looked like he was about to explode. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. Diana from Animal Control had been examining Thunder from a distance. The bull appears calm and healthy. There's no evidence of aggressive behavior beyond the defensive response to harassment. I'm not seeing any grounds for removal or any other action against the animal. But he destroyed my truck, Robert shouted. After you deliberately provoked him with an air horn, Diana replied. Mr. Henderson, if you poke a hornet's nest, you can't blame the hornets for stinging you. The crowd was starting to disperse, but not before several neighbors made a point of stopping to talk to Lisa. Tom and Janet Miller offered to help repair her fence. Mrs. Peterson said she would be happy to testify on Lisa's behalf if Robert tried to take legal action. Even some of the newer residents came over to apologize for Robert's behavior and express their support. Tommy Garcia asked if Thunder was okay and if he could bring him some apples later. Lisa smiled and said that Thunder would love that, as long as his parents were okay with it. Within an hour, the police and animal control had left. Robert's truck had to be towed out of the ditch by a heavy-duty wrecker, which cost him another $300. The truck itself was declared a total loss by his insurance company, who cited the animal harassment exclusion in his policy. Robert stood beside the road watching his destroyed truck being loaded onto the tow truck. His clipboard was muddy and bent, his clothes were ruined, and his dignity was in tatters. Several neighbors walked by and waved cheerfully, as if nothing unusual had happened. This isn't over, Robert muttered to Lisa as she worked on cleaning up the scattered fence pieces. Actually, Robert, I think it is, Lisa replied calmly. And next time you might want to think twice before messing with Thunder. Within a week, Robert had called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the livestock situation. Only 4 people showed up, and 3 of them were there to support Lisa. The motion to force her out failed by a vote of 3-1. 2 weeks later, Robert put his house up for sale. The real estate agent mentioned to several neighbors that Robert was looking for a community with stricter livestock restrictions. Most of the neighbors wished him luck finding such a place, though not necessarily in a sincere way. Thunder never showed any signs of trauma from the incident. If anything, he seemed more confident and content than before. Lisa noticed that he would sometimes stand near the road and watch cars go by as if he was keeping an eye on things. But he remained as gentle as ever with children and visitors.